Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Monday, the 15th of August. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. The army overnight demolished the West Bank home of terrorist Mohammed Touraira, the 17-year-old Palestinian who murdered 13-year-old Hallel Yafa Ariel as she slept in her Kiryat Arba home. IBA's Marga Dudkevich has the story.
Before dawn this morning, a large military force, including members of the Combat Engineering Corps, entered the West Bank village of Bani Naim near Hebron. After securing the area, troops placed explosive charges and also used an excavator to demolish the interior of the second story of the building where the terrorist lived with his family. Last week, the Supreme Court approved the demolition order, noting that some of the terrorist relatives were aware of his plans and later expressed support for the murder. It was June 30th when Touraira snuck into the Kiryat Arba home and fatally stabbed 13-year-old Hallel Yafa as she slept in her bed. He was later shot and killed by the community's emergency response team, who entered the house after receiving an alert of an infiltration inside the community. Following the fatal attack, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defence Minister Avigdor Lieberman ordered the army to seal off Bani Naim and to rescind the work permits of Touraira's immediate and extended family. Marga Dudkevich, IBA News.
A Palestinian man from the Bethlehem area accused of stabbing a police officer more than 2.5 years ago was just recently arrested in a joint Shin Bet police and IDF operation, the Shin Bet security agency revealed today. Mahmoud Yunis Abu Khanek, 21, of Abadia in the Bethlehem region, allegedly stabbed a police officer in the back near the West Bank settlement of Adam on the 23rd of December 2013. During interrogation, Abu Khanek revealed to security officials that on the day of the attack, he purchased the knife and hid it under his jacket. He took a taxi from Ramallah and headed for the Bethlehem area, searching for an Israeli target. En route, he spotted the police officer and got out of the cab in a nearby square, attacked him and fled. He told officials he plotted the attack with the hope of being killed and ending what he described as his miserable life. The evacuation of a border police base located inside the settlement of Beit El north of Ramallah is in its final stages, paving the way for 300 new housing units to be built there instead. Construction work on the new Bet El neighborhood is expected to begin in the coming weeks. Last July, then Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon approved construction permits for the new neighborhood after the Supreme Court ruled several buildings in the settlement to be illegal and ordered their demolition. The new housing units are considered compensation after residents voluntarily agreed to withdraw from 5 buildings located on private Palestinian land. In related news, the civil administration in Judea and Samaria is searching for land to build a large access road for Givat HaEtam, a new neighborhood in Efrat in Gush Etzion, with planned construction for some 2,500 housing units. The tract of land where the units will be built is located near the West Bank city of Bethlehem. Peace Now warned that the new neighborhood would have a devastating impact on the two-state solution, adding that continued work on the project demonstrates the true path of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has instructed IDF Chief of Staff Gadi Eisenkot to cease volunteer work by soldiers with the children of migrants in South Tel Aviv and focus instead on disadvantaged Israeli citizens. For the past few years, IDF soldiers have volunteered, taking migrant children to playgrounds and helping with their studies. But now the Defense Minister's office said that IDF soldiers need to work in areas where there exists consensus, and volunteering with the children of African migrant workers and refugees should be stopped because it involves activities with a population that isn't residing here lawfully. Lieberman said it was more appropriate for IDF soldiers to help Holocaust survivors, the needy, Israeli needy that is, and the elderly. NGO Eli Fellet, which runs the volunteer program, criticized the decision as politically motivated. President Rivlin has expressed support for the program, saying it is not a sin for soldiers to lend a hand to the helpless and that the children are not to blame for their parents' illegal entry to the country. Likud MK Amir Ohana applauded the decision, meanwhile saying that volunteer work with migrant children was spitting in the face of residents of South Tel Aviv who are groaning under the burden of illegal infiltration. Eli Fellet said it is still being contacted by military units seeking to volunteer, so it appears the instructions have not yet been transmitted. The state prosecutor's office has announced it will file an indictment against Ashkelon Mayor Itamar Shimoni for corruption and breach of trust, subject to a hearing in which Shimoni will be able to appeal the prospective charges. Shimoni is suspected of signing compensation agreements to buy the silence of two female subordinates with whom he allegedly had sexual relations. He and several acquaintances are suspected of raising the money for this deal in bribes from businessmen and contractors working in the city. The case, pertaining to sexual offences against the same women, was closed for lack of evidence. Jordan's King Abdullah has accused Israel of repeatedly violating the status quo on the Temple Mount. In an interview with the Arab newspaper Al Dustur today, King Abdullah referred to the violence that erupted yesterday at the holy site. Our responsibility for the Islamic holy sites in Jerusalem heads the priorities in our country's foreign policy, King Abdullah said. On Sunday, over 900 Jews and tourists were permitted to visit the Temple Mount under heavy police protection on the occasion of Tisha B'Av. Muslim worshippers verbally and physically attacked some of the visitors, forcing police to detain several of them. Later, 7 Jewish visitors were removed by police from the Temple Mount after they were accused of violating the understandings that permit Jews to visit the site but not to pray there. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is to meet with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey at the end of the month. A report in the Qatar-based Al Khalij news site said the meeting is part of an international tour by Abbas, who plans to visit Egypt, Jordan, France and other Arab states. Abbas will discuss the situation in Gaza with his Turkish counterpart, as well as the French peace initiative, and will also discuss ways to strengthen bilateral ties between Ankara and Ramallah. Turning to the United States elections, and the Donald Trump campaign is launching an effort to gain votes right here in Israel. The Republicans Abroad Israel branch will be holding opening events at shopping malls and localities where Israelis with the right to vote in the US elections live, kicking off this evening in Modi'in. According to Tzvi Brot, the head of the Trump effort in Israel, there are some 300,000 people living in Israel who are eligible to vote in the November elections, representing one of the largest American expatriate populations in the world. Brot said the Trump campaign's objective is to get Israeli Americans to vote, adding that most of the voters in Israel tend to lean to the right politically. They have rolled out a new slogan which goes, "Trump, the Israeli interest." Jubilation in the Syrian town of Manbij after US-backed rebel forces conquered the border town from Islamic State forces. Thousands of displaced residents returned home over the weekend after the Syria Democratic Forces announced that the last ISIS fighters had been routed. Footage shows women tearing off their niqab face coverings and trampling their abaya gowns, and the men cutting their hitherto compulsory beards. The retreating ISIS forces fled with 2,000 civilian human shields to protect against airstrikes from the international coalition. A number of civilians are believed to have managed to return. The liberation of Manbij, in which US special forces played a significant role, is considered the most ambitious advance by American-backed forces since the launch of the anti-ISIS operation 2 years ago. It represents a serious strategic blow to ISIS in light of its strategic importance as a conduit for foreign jihadists and provisions arriving across the porous Turkish border. As part of enforcing terms barring the exploitation of the social network for terrorism, Facebook shut down the account of Hamas official Ismail Radwan today. The move comes days after Facebook shut down the accounts of senior Hamas officials Salah Barawel and Islamic Jihad leader Khalid al-Bach. In an interview with the Ma'an news agency, Hamas spokesman Hazem Qasim accused Israel of being behind the move, saying the closure of the accounts of Hamas members is tantamount to Israeli terror operations against social media platforms. Sports and Culture Minister Miri Regev has called on the International Olympics Committee to hold a memorial ceremony for the 11 Israeli athletes murdered in the 1972 Munich Games at the opening ceremony of every Olympic Games. Regev's comments at a memorial service for the athletes yesterday in Rio de Janeiro came nearly 2 weeks after the IOC held a minute's silence in memory of the slain Israeli athletes and inaugurated a memorial site at the Olympic Village in their honor, which will be installed at each Olympic Village in future. IOC President Thomas Bach, who also participated in yesterday's ceremony, said the victims should not be forgotten.
This important ceremony is not enough. The grief for the Munich athletes does not belong only to the families. It does not belong only to Israel. It does not belong only to the Jewish people. It is a tragedy that affects the entire world of sport. It is a tragedy for all who hold life dear. It is a tragedy for all who want to live without fear. And it is a tragedy for the International Olympic Committee, which will always have a black flag hanging over it. That is why this memorial ceremony must become an integral part of the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games.
Commemorating the lives of those who have passed away is part of the bond that unites us all as humans. This is why moments of remembrance like the one today are so important. Through this sacred act of remembrance, the spirit of those who have departed continues to live on. We owe it to the memory of them to uphold the values they stood for. Terror will not win.
Meanwhile, in Rio de Janeiro, with 2 bronze medals under its judo belts, Israel has experienced a number of near misses in its sprint towards the medals podium. Track and field champion Hanna Kniazieva-Minenko finished 5th in the women's triple jump, reaching 14.68 metres in her 4th attempt, 6 centimetres below the Kazakh athlete who won bronze, with gold going to Katerine Imbargen of Colombia. In windsurfing, Marjan Davidovic came 9th in the final race of the RSX women's competition and coming 7th overall. Today, Israel will compete in preliminary rounds for synchronized swimming and sailing, for which Israel won its only gold medal to date at the 2004 Athens Games. Meanwhile, in the rest of the world, Jamaica's legendary Usain Bolt won his 3rd Olympic 100-metre title in 9.81 seconds. 39 people have drowned in Israel since the start of the summer bathing season, which began in May. 11 of the fatalities were tourists. This, according to statistics released by the Magen David Adom ambulance service, which noted that in the corresponding period of last year, 22 people drowned, that's 17 fewer. Sanctions by lifeguards during a work dispute in the first 5 weeks of the bathing season were reportedly part of the reason for the high numbers of casualties, according to a report in Globes, but this was rejected by Avi Afia, the chairman of the Lifeguards Association, who said during the period when lifeguards were not at their stations, wardens and police were supposed to be patrolling the nation's beaches. Good news for immigrants. A plan to discard the 10-year tax exemption for foreign income has been blocked by Absorption Minister Sofer Landwehr. The proposal had been slated to go into effect in January and would have required new immigrants and Israelis who return to the country after an absence of at least a decade to pay taxes on income earned abroad. The proposal was part of a global effort to crack down on tax evasion among OECD members. But Landwehr was able to shelve the proposal, arguing the exemption encourages immigration by the wealthy and entrepreneurs, and that ending it would have created a bureaucratic headache to monitor immigrant taxpayers. Still in finance, shares are up on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, and the shekel is mixed in foreign currency trading. And in weather, mercifully, the intense summer heat is breaking. It will be partly cloudy throughout the week with a gradual drop in temperatures. And that's all for today. Laura Cornfield will be back tomorrow with all the latest. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, wishing you a good evening live from Jerusalem.